Relentless, probing, fearless. This is Emmy Award-winning Full Disclosure with Leslie Dutton, bringing you the truth by revealing the news behind the news. On June 16th, the Full Disclosure Network presented another in its series of critical issues at FDN's worldwide headquarters in Marina del Rey. Featured speaker Mr. G. Edward Griffin, noted author, lecturer, and filmmaker, enlightened the crowd with his political discussion, Authority Cannot Exceed Its Source. Griffin, who authored the popular The Creature from Jekyll Island, an exhaustive, informative look at the creation and operation of the Federal Reserve, touched on the Fed briefly.
The Federal Reserve is a banking cartel. It is not a government agency. It is a banking cartel. No different than a banana cartel or an oil cartel. It just happens to be a banking cartel. And like all cartels, it has only one purpose for its existence, and that is to promote the advantage and the benefit of the members of the cartel. Nothing more. And that is true of the Federal Reserve. And if you recognize that the Federal Reserve is not a government agency, but is in fact a union, a professional union of banks, the biggest banks in America, then you understand everything that the Federal Reserve has done. And as one of the gentlemen in this short video said, he was one of the people sort of in the camp, he was saying, well, the Fed should do this and should do this, but it has failed miserably. And that tells me that he himself does not understand what the Federal Reserve is. He still thinks it's a government agency and it has failed to serve the people and to help the economy. If he was aware that it was a cartel of banks, then he would have said, they've succeeded amazingly well. He would understand that is the purpose of a cartel, is not to serve the people, but to serve the members of the cartel. Once you understand that core principle, that this is the greatest, one of the greatest deceptions of all time, is to make people think that the Fed is there for you. Once you understand that it's not, then everything that the Fed has failed to do, you find out it was a success from its perspective because it has served the interests of the banks very, very well indeed.
Griffin also took a few moments to rewind on a topic recently covered by a previous FDN guest speaker about the minimum wage law in California.
There's no conspiracy about it. It was done rather quietly, I might say, but not conspiratorially. It was right out in the open, as most of these things really are. Even the Federal Reserve is right out in the open. There's no secret about it. You just have to do a little digging. So anyway, the discussion at that time was about how absurd it was to guarantee, I think it was a $15 an hour minimum wage to everybody in Los Angeles, in fact, California now. And now they're talking about spreading this scheme to the rest of the nation. And of course, I agree that it's absurd. And the discussion, not only here, but everywhere in the press where they talk about it on the street, it's all about, oh, that's unrealistic. You can't afford that. That's too much. It should be less. Or maybe it should be more, or how are we going to determine what it should be? But that's not right. That level was not right. And I kept saying to myself, where in the discussion is the bigger issue? It's not a question of whether it's the right level, but who in the heck authorized the government to set any level for minimum wages? Where do they get that authority? Where does it come from?
Then it was on to the featured speech on governmental authority and where the government actually gets its power.
Authority cannot exceed its source. When you think about it, rights either are intrinsic to the individual or they're given to the individual by someone or something else. They're either with you or they're added to you. It's like software or hardware. And those who really have a strong view of freedom are very clear on the answer. They say it is hardware. It comes with us when we're born. It's intrinsic to us. Some will say it's God-given. Others will say, I'm not sure about the God issue, but it's there when you're born. It's part of you. It's intrinsic. The people that take that position are generally described as individualists, and we might come to that later. But I think we need to understand that the great debate on all of these freedom issues center around a chasm and viewpoint between those who are individualists on one side, and on the other side, they're collectivists. Those are the words. They're strange words. We're trying to put the word collectivist back into the language. It used to be there. You go to a book that's 80 years old or 100 years old, you'll find it all the time. But after FDR, why, that word was gone, because FDR was, of course, a great advocate of collectivism, and most of the political leaders of America since that time, and even before that time, going back to Woodrow Wilson, were advocates of collectivism. So we're trying to put that word back in. And so we've got this debate between individualists on the one side and collectivists on the other side, and the individualist says that human rights are intrinsic to the individual. And the collectivist says, they're granted to the individual by the state. Big difference when you think about it, because if the state has the power to grant you your rights, it has the power to take them away. Governments derive their powers from the people. They like to say that. They don't mean it, but they say it. But we really believe it. I think everyone in this room believes that our elected representatives get their power from us. So if that is true, then what power do we have to give? What right do we have to use force against another human being, even lethal force if necessary? And there aren't many cases. There are 3, I believe, and most people will agree to this. You can use lethal force as an individual against another individual only in the defense of life, liberty, and property. If somebody's trying to take your life, or to enslave you, or to take from you what is rightfully yours, you have a right to defend those 3 things. And very few people would object to that right. That's yours. It's born with you. Those are the fundamental principles of all human rights. It's right there. So those are the things that we as individuals can delegate to our elected representatives to defend our lives, our liberty, and our property. That's it, nothing more. So where did these lousy politicians think they got the right to tell us that they're going to make the rules for us in those categories? And the answer is they just made them up. They do not have the legal, logical, ethical, moral authority to compel any human being to do any of those things. And then we're going to start thinking about this, I think. And so that we can grapple more effectively with issues that come up all the time, like minimum wage and seat belts and hate speech and stuff like, on and on and on. 99% of the laws on the books at the international, national, state, county, city level have to do with authority that exceeds its source. Unless you take the hardcore position and say the state itself is its authority. It is the master, and we are the servants. If you're prepared to accept that, then everything else is logical.
And Griffin believes that individuals have rights which rise above the collectivism currently scouring the country.
The intrinsic nature of rights. I believe that only individuals have rights, not the collective group. I got to stop there. Why don't I believe that the collective group has rights? But first of all, the group doesn't exist. Think about that. The group doesn't exist. You can't touch a group. You can't see a group. It's an abstraction. It's a mathematical concept. It's in the brain. It doesn't exist. You can touch individuals. You can see individuals, and then your brain says, oh, that's a group because I've got many individuals. But individuals are real. Group is an abstraction, like the word forest. There's no such thing as a forest. There are trees only. You can cut down a tree. You can cut down lots of trees, but you can't cut down a forest because that's an abstraction and it doesn't exist. And so if you say that the group, which doesn't exist, has rights that are above the individual, which does exist, you've made a horrible mistake. Because you've set in motion an ideological trap, which allows all the demagogues to come forth and say, I speak on behalf of the group. I speak on behalf of society. And we are taught this in school. I was taught this in school, that the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. I thought that was cool. I thought that was wonderful. It's kind of like democracy, right? I mean, democracy. 51% of the vote gets whatever it wants, even if it's obnoxious, even if it's horrible. If you get 51% of the vote and you win the election, it's winner take all. You can now do whatever you want to do.
Griffin is adamant that the government in the USA is a collective democratic state when it should be a republic.
It's a horrible thought. Democracy is a horrible concept, and our founding fathers said so in no uncertain words. They said, one thing we don't want is a democracy. All democracies fail, they say. They wind up in dictatorships. Our founding fathers said that, but we don't read our founding fathers, so we don't know anything about that. You take for an example, a lynch mob. Well, there's democracy in action. There's only one dissenting vote. But what's wrong with that? You see, if you buy into this stuff and you're not thinking, and they don't want you to think about these things in school, you say, well, that's wonderful. I'm all for majority vote, and we don't ask within what limits. Now we're back to this issue. You can use lethal force only in the defense of life, liberty, and property, nothing more. And that, of course, involves the right to jury trial and all of these other things. So there's the difference between a democracy and a republic, which classically is defined. A democracy is pure democracy, is majority rule, end of discussion. And a republic used to be defined as majority rule, but with limitations on the will of the majority. Very serious limitations on the will of the majority to prevent the majority from destroying the individual rights of the minority. Even a minority of one against millions, every individual, under the concept of individualism, is the supreme component of society, not the group which doesn't exist. And when you go through all that, you wind up with the amazing conclusion that the best way to promote the best interests of the majority or the greater number is to defend the rights of the individual. That is what produces the greatest good for the greatest number, not the sacrifice of the individual, but the defense of the individual.
Transcripts of Mr. Griffin's talk are available by contacting Full Disclosure on our website. Mr. Griffin also has a wide variety of materials available at realityzone.com. The Full Disclosure Network is currently developing a searchable database of its vast library of archived transcripts and video programming. This consists of raw footage and in-depth interviews from 25 years of covering news of interest to the people. This content contains more than 900 interviews and never-before-released raw footage, and will eventually be used in documentary film productions and more. The Full Disclosure Network needs your support to preserve the archives which contain exclusive interviews with government officials, newsmakers, and citizens recorded over the past 2 decades. Funding is urgently needed to complete the Full Disclosure Network Digital Asset Management System project, so we can make efficient use of this historically relevant content. We invite you to become a charter member of the Full Disclosure Network Preservation Project. Your contribution is tax-deductible. Help us continue to be the news behind the news.